ओके, तो आज हमारे साथ हैं हमारे रामानंद प्रभु और हमारी सुदेवी दीदी। जैसा कि आप जानते हैं, रामानंद प्रभु हमारे राधा रमन और कृष्ण कुमारी दीदी के सुपुत्र हैं, जो कुछ दिन पहले हमारे प्रोग्राम में आए थे। हॉलैंड से हैं। प्रभु जी भी हॉलैंड में ही बड़े हुए। फिलहाल ये इंग्लैंड में रहते हैं, लंदन के आसपास में कैंट में रहते हैं। तो ये पूरे परिवार ने इनके गुरुदेव से 1996 में मुलाकात की थी, जब महाराज जी पहली बार हॉलैंड गए थे विदेश। तभी इनकी मुलाकात महाराज जी से हुई थी और इन्होंने फिर महाराज जी से दीक्षा 1999 में ली, 3 साल बाद। और फिर ये भारत की ट्रिप पे आए 6 महीने के लिए, विच इज रियली ग्रेट। कितनी उम्र होगी प्रभु जी उस समय आपकी जब आए थे आप? 18 years. So you can imagine 18-year-old boy in search of prem or truth, coming to India for 6 months continuously. That's amazing. तो 18 में तो आप स्कूल में होंगे, उसमें यूनिवर्सिटी में?
स्कूल में था, ब्रेक छोड़ दिया था उस समय।
अच्छा, ब्रेक ले लिया।
हाँ।
So yeah, so you must be very motivated to do that. ठीक है, प्रभु जी 6 महीने के लिए आए और उसके बाद आए तो आए और कुछ साल के लिए पूज्यपाद भक्तिवेदांत वन महाराज जी के साथ ही चिपक गए और उन्होंने उनके साथ कई जगह महाराज जी के साथ ट्रेवल किया, उनके प्रोग्रामों में गए। और इनकी एक बिटिया भी है जो महाराज जी जाते टाइम उसको बोल गए थे कि इसको कृष्णदासी बनाना, तो प्रभु जी उसमें अपनी पूरी चेष्टा कर रहे हैं और अभी अपना भजन साधन करते हैं। मैं अक्सर पहले लंदन जाता था फ्लाइट पे, हर हफ्ते ही ऑलमोस्ट। तो एक दिन मैं वहां से इस्कॉन मंदिर गया था। लंदन के बीच में एक छोटा इस्कॉन मंदिर है डाउनटाउन में, तो वहां पे अचानक प्रभु जी के दर्शन हो गए और प्रभु जी मुझको देख के इतने प्रसन्न हुए और मैं भी इतना प्रसन्न हुआ कि अरे अचानक से कहाँ हम दोनों मिल गए। और बड़ा आनंद आया था उस दिन। तो अच्छा लगा प्रभु से मिलकर। पहले तो मिले थे हम शुरू में। और हमारे सुदेवी दीदी हैं, इनके भी दोनों पेरेंट्स भक्त हैं। Her both parents are devotees, Sudevi Didis, Pandita Mataji and Budhar Prabhu. And we have good fortune that Budhar Prabhu will be on our program very shortly on Friday 30th. So we'll get to hear from him also. And both of them are disciples of Pujapad Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Ji, both her parents. So when parents are in bhajan, it's very natural for the kids to follow the path and it becomes very easy. So she got first darshan of Gurudev as a small baby in 1989. You must be very young that time. You don't remember? Yeah, must be a few years old probably. Yeah. And she got Harinam from Gurudev in England in 1996. Oh, that is on first trip of Gurudev.
Yes.
Yeah, very nice. So how old were you then?
I was 7.
Oh, very lucky to have Harinam at the age of 7 years old. Very nice. You have some lot of good karmas behind you, Sukriti.
And my parents.
Yes.
Lots of nice opportunities.
Yes. And she got the full Diksha in 2004 in Jagannath Puri. And she has a master's degree. And she has also spent many summers and winters in Vrindavan. So she's also a visitor quite often to India and Vrindavan Dham. So as you can see, both of their parents are in bhajan, and both of them are also initiated by Gurudev, and they are doing their practice of bhajan very seriously. So let's hear from them. How is their journey to Gurudev, how they came to Gurudev, and what were their feelings and thoughts, how Gurudev influenced their life, and how they're doing now, what kind of seva they are doing, and how. So Hare Krishna. Hare Bol. Hello, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Hare Bol.
Sorry, Prabhuji, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, I think one of the wires got pulled out or something. It was loose. So I'm just starting my laptop. Meanwhile, you can start. I'm on my phone now.
Okay.
Sorry.
First of all, I offer my humble Dandavat pranams into the lotus feet of my dear Srila Gurudev. Nitya Vishva Om Vishnupad Astota Safashishi Srila Bhakti-Vedanta Narayana Gosvami Maharaj. And to all our Guru Varga and Shiksha Gurus and all those Vaishnavas and Vaishnavis who have helped me lifetime after lifetime. Without the help of the Vaishnavas, I would be nowhere. We would be nowhere. I'm not completely sure where to begin, so I guess I'll begin at the very beginning, which, as I said, I actually have no memory of, but it feels significant to me that I got to have darshan of Srila Gurudev in 1989 on my first trip to India. I was just over a year old. My parents had decided to move to Mayapur and we were going to live there. My father was going to teach in the Gurukul, but as soon as we got there, things didn't work out and we ended up leaving. And because we left, my parents decided to go to Vrindavan. It was actually in the month of Kartik. And I only found out this part of the journey, as you called it, Ajay Prabhu, only a few years ago. And it's a bit of a revelation to me. But on the evening of Radhakun's appearance day, my mother and father took me to Radhakund and bathed me in Radhakund at midnight. And soon after that, I think a few hours after that, I stopped breathing and they had to take me to hospital in Mathura. I was having an asthma attack or something, maybe from the cold water, I don't know, maybe just mercy, maybe I was ready to go, who knows. But they took me to Mathura and took me to the hospital and then I was fine. But because we were then in Mathura, my father decided that he wanted to visit Keshavji Gaudiya Math because he'd always heard about it. He heard specifically about the beautiful Mahaprabhu Thakurji that is installed there. And so he wanted to have darshan of Mahaprabhu. So we went to Keshavji Gaudiya Math and at that time, my parents met Srila Gurudev for the first time. And I think they had a darshan with him and I was completely unconscious. But having found this out only a few years ago, it felt very significant to me because it made me realize that Gurudev was with me from the very beginning, not just from the age of 7 when I remember seeing him for the first time, but from basically the very beginning of my life. And actually it was me almost dying that led to having his darshan, and I feel like that must have been his arrangement. it feels as if it was almost a really symbolic way to start off my relationship with him, to show that when we're struggling to breathe in this world and we can't survive, Gurudev is immediately there, and he immediately appears without us even having to call him. Sometimes he's there for us. So we were fortunate to have that darshan, but I can't speak for my parents, but I don't think any of us knew how fortunate we actually were. And then we ended up moving back to the Netherlands, where I was born, and then we moved to England. And I think in 1995, I mean, I won't tell you everything because I suppose my father will say this story, but he was in touch with Brajanath Prabhu, and he'd seen Brajanath Prabhu's chart. Brajanath Prabhu contacted my father, who's a Vedic astrologer, and asked him to look up something in his chart. And from looking at Brajanath Prabhu's chart, my father saw that he had the association of a Mahabhagavat Vaishnav. And so even though Brajanath Prabhu's question was something to do with business, I think, my father wrote back to him and said, which Vaishnav are you associating with? Because I can see that you have someone very exalted around you right now. And so Brajanath Prabhu told my father who it was, and my father said, okay, well, when he comes to the West, please bring him to our house. And not long after Gurudev came in May 1996 to England, and he first went to London, and my father took me, my mother and my younger sister stayed at home, and my father took me to see him in London. And I still remember that first moment of seeing him, where there was hardly anyone around. It was an almost empty room, and Gurudev was sitting there completely effulgent and glowing. Like in my memory, he's just like covered in white light, and smiling at me and looking at me with so much recognition, which I think made a really, really strong impression on me, to see a Vaishnav and instantly feel known by him and feel like accepted and wanted by him as well. And a few days later, he came to Bath, where we were living at the time, and he stayed in mine and my sister's bedroom, and he came with Madhav Maharaj, Naveen, who was Naveen Krishna at the time, and yeah, so they stayed in our room, and I think we were just expecting a few people, but so many turned up, over 50 at least. And as my father will tell you, it was quite chaotic but beautiful, quite a shock, I think, because somehow word spread that this amazing Vaishnav was in the country. And so there were people we didn't even know just turning up at our doorstep, sleeping in the park and across the road, causing chaos. But it was such an amazing time, and it was really sweet because I got to, at that time, whoever came to see him got to meet Gurudev personally and speak with him personally and ask him anything. And so I ended up, I think it was on he stayed with us, I think, for 2 or 3 days. And on the second day, my mother asked my sister and I, would you like to take initiation? And my sister and I, we'd actually grown up a little bit distant from ISKCON. We were a bit removed from devotees. We saw devotees and we went to temples and everything. But my parents, having spent a long time in ISKCON, were a little bit disillusioned, maybe. And so they brought my sister and I up with some very realistic ideas of what it means to try and be a devotee in this world. So when we met Srila Gurudev, it was somehow, I could see their excitement, and I could see that this was an example of that true, pure Mahabhagavat Vaishnav that they had been teaching my sister and I is a real devotee. So when my mother asked me if Lali and I wanted initiation, it was quite easy, actually. It was really, I didn't have to think that much. There was this, and maybe it's because I was a child and you don't have to think about much, but there was this immediate feeling of, yes, Gurudev's mine and I am his, and we have that bond. Like it didn't have to take, we didn't have to work up to it or build something. It was just instant. And Lali and I, or it just felt like we belonged to him and he to us. So we got to have Harinam initiation in our bedroom, which felt very special, I think. Especially I was 7 and my sister was 5. And I think I've told this before, but Srila Gurudev, when he gave me my beads, he told me to chant 2 rounds in the morning before school and 2 rounds after school. And then because my sister was 5, he told her to chant whatever she could. And then he said, but if the Maha Mantra is too difficult for you, he said, just chant Govinda, Govinda, Govinda on each bead. And I remember at that moment thinking, wow, he's so amazing. Like, he wants to make this process so easy for us and approachable, and gives us whatever it is we need at whichever level we're at. So that Gurudev made some very amazing first impressions, I think, as a child. My sister had a pet hamster. It's like a little mouse, and I did too. And she really loved animals. And when Gurudev first came to our house, she really wanted to show Gurudev our pets. And I think we both felt like, well, if they get to see Srila Gurudev, then they'll be okay. They'll have a human birth in their next life. They're going to be fine. And we brought Srila Gurudev to our animals. And I think she asked Gurudev, I don't know if she did or if he spontaneously did, but I think she picked him up and she asked Gurudev to like stroke him and touch him. And my mother had warned us beforehand that that's not really like something that's done. Animals are not so clean. He may not want to, but he actually did. And I remember as a child thinking, wow, this Vaishnava is so compassionate, that he's even doing something that people normally wouldn't do, just to give compassion to that creature. But then later on I realized it was also a form of compassion towards us as children, to show us like how much he cared about the things that we cared about and how munificent he was. And I think all of my experiences with Srila Gurudev really embodied that compassion that he has for all jivas, all living beings, regardless of what form we come in, whether it's a hamster or a Westerner or a woman or whatever it is. Like, he didn't exclude anyone from the opportunity to have his association, to hear his Harikatha, to receive some mercy. And I think that shows by how diverse Srila Gurudev Sangha is as well. There's devotees from all parts of the world, all mentalities, all natures, all stages, all levels of heart, and Gurudev somehow made room for everyone and picked everyone up and put everyone in his pocket. I think everyone probably feels that feeling of having a deep connection to Srila Gurudev, no matter how much time they spent with him or didn't spend with him. I remember hearing that one definition of true guru is that he will make the disciple feel as though they are the most loved. And I think there's maybe so many devotees have had that experience of really having a moment where they feel, wow, Gurudev loves me so much. And that feeling is enough to cement something in your heart for the rest of your life. I remember reading a quote from Srila Bhakti Rakshak Maharaj where he said, I wish I'd like written it down, where he said that the Vaishnavas, or I think it was either the Vaishnava or Guru, will say something to the disciple, and by saying that something to the disciple, they'll plant a seed in the heart of the disciple, and nothing that anyone else says can change that. And that's really, at least in my life, what I felt Srila Gurudev was doing. I know that I don't have like most of the qualifications that so many of his disciples have, because he has some very beautiful, soft-hearted, qualified disciples. But in my own life, I felt like what Gurudev was really doing was planting a seed and creating a strong sense of Sambandha. When I was around 13, I'd been speaking to a friend of mine at school, and I'd been talking to her about Srila Gurudev, and she showed an interest, and when Srila Gurudev came to Bath, I invited her to have darshan of him and to come meet him. But I hadn't really preached to her. I hadn't really told her much about the philosophy. I was just talking about my Gurudev, and it was like him that she got attracted to. So she agreed and she came along. I was 13, she was 14, and her name was Christina. And when we went into the room to meet Srila Gurudev, he asked her what her name was, and she said Christina. And he immediately was like, oh, your name comes from Christ. And he said, he explained, as I think many people have heard him explain, how the name Christ comes from Krishna. And he was like, Krishna, Krishna, Christo, Christos, Christ, and did this whole thing and explained to her how Christ and Krishna are the same name. And then he said to her, so it doesn't matter who you pray to, but the important thing is that you pray. And then he started speaking to her about all these different things that were happening in her life. Like he would give an example of some kind of material suffering, but it was exactly the material suffering that she had without her telling him. And he was just really encouraging her to, what I realized at the end was to be a Christian. And that had been a really, that was a really surprising thing for me, because I think as an eager 13-year-old, I thought, I'm going to bring my friend to Srila Gurudev and he's going to amaze her, and then she's going to just want to start chanting and become a devotee, and it's going to be amazing. And actually, Srila Gurudev saw straight into her heart and saw exactly what she needed and how she should cultivate her spiritual life, and instructed her from there, which was very eye-opening for me. And it was amazing because very soon after she did become a Christian, she started going to church, she joined Christian groups, and she started really praying, which she hadn't done before. And then we lost contact for many years. And when I met her again, it was when she was pregnant, and she told me she married another Christian and they were very devout in their spiritual life. And then her first daughter was born on Nityananda Trayodasi, which I felt was just like a mercy from Srila Gurudev, and almost like coming full circle to show me that he didn't come to force anyone to be a certain way, but rather to speak straight to the heart of the disciple, of the jiva, and to nourish them in the way that was most important to them. And that's something I'll probably come back to in a bit, but I saw that over and over again in how he spoke to me, in the difference between how he spoke to me compared to one friend and another friend and another friend. Like I could see how Srila Gurudev had such deeply personal relationships with each person that came to him. Nothing was replicated, nothing was like formulaic or just saying the same thing to everyone. It was very, very personal. And that personal thing meant that we all felt so seen by him and so understood by him in a way that no one else in this world can, that from that moment on, we're destined to remember him in everything. The next friend that I brought to Srila Gurudev was a few years later. I brought her to the Italy festival in 2004. I was 15, she was 16. And it was just before that, I had been showing her videos of animals getting slaughtered. And from watching those videos, she decided to become vegetarian. But she told me afterwards that even though she was vegetarian, she still ate some fish, because she told me she didn't see any videos of fish getting slaughtered, so fish was fine, she could eat fish. But then one day when she ate some fish, she got some very bad food poisoning, really, really bad. She got very high fever. And the next day when she came back to school, she told me about her experiences. And she said that when she had a fever, she had a dream. And Srila Gurudev, who she'd never met, came to her in the dream and started telling her all of these things about herself that were completely, she said that she couldn't remember what they were, but everything he said was completely true. And she was so amazed and so shocked. And she said, what should I do? And I was like, well, I think you should write him a letter. So she wrote him a letter and gave it to my father. And my father, who I think was with Srila Gurudev at the time, or going to see him soon, perhaps in New Braj, he read the letter to Srila Gurudev. And Srila Gurudev's response to her was, you should come see me in Italy. So she decided, okay, I'll come. But the Italy festival was in our exam season, and I had finished my exams, but she hadn't. So she came a few days later to the festival for the last 2 days. And my father and I went to pick her up from the airport, and we just came back to the festival site, and we were walking into the festival site as Gurudev was walking from the building he was staying in to the building that he was going to give Harikatha in. And we were sort of walking in so that we managed to just, as Gurudev was coming out, like we met Srila Gurudev at that exact moment. And Gurudev comes up to me and he's like, who's this? And I was like, oh, this is my friend Saskia. She's the one who had a dream of you, Srila Gurudev. And then my friend Saskia, she was very immature and she really liked being like a child, and people were always telling her at school, you have to grow up, act responsibly, be a grown-up. But she just wanted to be a child still. So the first thing Srila Gurudev says to her is, do you want to be a child? And she got nervous and she said no, thinking that that was the right answer to say, because all the adults are always telling her, don't be a child. And then Srila Gurudev said, no, we want to be children forever. He said, we want to be 12 and a half years old forever. And then he said, do you know the Maha Mantra? And she tried to say it, but she couldn't get it right. So then he said it and got her to repeat. And she repeated the whole Maha Mantra after him. And then he just says to her, now you are initiated. Come to me tomorrow for beads. And she was completely like, she was just stunned. Like, I think she was happy, but I think she didn't even understand anything. She didn't know what initiation was. She didn't know what she was getting into. But before walking away, Srila Gurudev turned to me and he pointed at me and he said, look after her. And it was really that was a shock for me. And I realize now how Srila Gurudev used the friends that I brought to him as a way to teach me about what it actually means to speak to other people about Krishna consciousness. With the first friend that I brought, he was teaching me about how we have to be able to understand the individual, and we have to be able to help them from wherever they're at. And we have to have compassion for that, even if where they're at is not where we're at, we should encourage them from that place. And with my second friend, Saskia, I felt like his instruction to me was very much that bringing someone to Krishna consciousness, or even teaching someone anything about Krishna consciousness, is not a small thing. It's not something that we mass produce or just push out there. There's a huge responsibility that comes with trying to help someone. Because I think both times I had this impression that if I brought someone to Gurudev, then he would just take care of them and everything would be fine. All I need to do is get them there, and then he would do his thing. And he did. Like, I brought my friend, he initiated her on the spot without her asking. But then he made it clear to me that I have a responsibility. And I think that was quite a big lesson for me. Because as a child, I was very enthusiastic to speak to my friends about Krishna consciousness. But I think what Gurudev was trying to teach me is what does it actually mean to do that? And once we start thinking about what it means to speak to others about Krishna consciousness, we have to start thinking about, wait, am I actually ready to look after someone? Am I actually ready to help this person in all the ways that they need? And am I even qualified? So it was, I feel like Gurudev taught me a lot that way. I should probably wrap up soon, shouldn't I? Okay, I'll just say like one more thing that felt.
Didi, we have enough time. It's only 8:45. You can go on. Yeah.
Okay. Well, you need to speak as well.
Yeah. You work out between yourself.
So the other thing that, the other way in which Gurudev had a huge impact on me personally, and I think taught me a lot, was that from my mother told me that I think when I was 8 years old, she asked Srila Gurudev if my sister and I should go to Gurukul, because there was a Gurukul opening up in New Braj. And Srila Gurudev actually told her no, he wanted us to go to the best, like education-wise, the best schools possible, and to go to university. And apparently, I didn't know this, but he told my parents a few times. He made it clear he wanted us to go to university and be very highly educated. And it wasn't just me that he said this to. I found out that he actually said this to, I think, most or all of the girls in New Braj. And I feel like that's something very special about Srila Gurudev, is that he really tried to empower not just his sons, but his daughters too. In a way that was sometimes unusual or that moved away from the culture, perhaps. But Srila Gurudev was very strong about that. And when I was 16, I was in school. I still had a year and a half left. And I had some exams, but I got sick for my exams and I missed them. And it meant that I got like no grades and I would have to redo the year. But at the same time, lots of other stuff was happening in our lives. My father's business ended. We had to sell the house. Lots of things were falling apart, just one thing after another. Our material lives were becoming completely destroyed. And I decided, okay, I want to take a break from school. I want to go to India for 6 months and just be with Srila Gurudev, and then I'll figure my life out afterwards. So I did that, and I went to India, and I had an amazing, this was Kartik 2005, had an amazing Kartik, and then I got to spend the winter in Govardhan with Sharmani Didi painting. And after that time, I was so fired up and so happy with the time that I'd had that I thought, I completely forgot Srila Gurudev's instruction about going to university. And I just thought, I'm going to do this forever. I'm going to live in the temple and I'm just going to paint and travel and be with Srila Gurudev everywhere he goes. And I was so happy about it. And then after that 6 months was over, we went to Germany in 2006. I think it was April 2006. And there was a darshan, and it was in a long hallway, and there were all these devotees, and I was right at the back. And somehow Srila Gurudev points to me and like calls me over. And so I'm like moving through all the devotees, and I get there. And his mood seemed very heavy at that time. And he asked me, am I in school? And I said no. And then he said, you should finish your education, get a job, maintain yourself, and stand on your own 2 feet for your bhajan. And this was actually one of the most clear instructions Gurudev had given me. But it really actually freaked me out, because at that time I didn't have anywhere to live. I didn't have any qualifications. I dropped out of school, had no money. Like, materially, my life was a mess. I didn't even know how I was going to get back into school. And I didn't want to redo, high school. I just wanted to go straight to university. But it really, I found it very, Srila Gurudev's instruction was actually very distressing, because I didn't know how it was going to be possible. I just couldn't see how I was going to be able to sort out my life in this way. But I tried, and what happened was just one miracle after another. I managed to get into university with no grades, having not finished school. And then it requires money to go to university, and I didn't have any. And to apply for the loan, you need to put down all your financial information, but I didn't have any either. So we just left. My mother and I tried to fill it in, and we left. There was like pages and pages of financial information you need to put, and I left everything blank. I didn't write anything. And long story short, I got into university, and the government didn't just give me a loan, they also gave me a grant, like extra money to live off of, which never happens, rarely happens. And when it does, it's because you have to prove that you need it. And I couldn't even prove that I needed it. And that to me was like this first miracle of realizing that Gurudev was doing it, because at some point in that process, I felt very desperate. Gurudev had given me an instruction, and I didn't feel like I could follow it. And then I went through university, which was okay. And my grades were up and down. But at the very end, when we came to pick up our final grade, I went to go see what it was, and I found out that I got the highest grade in the class, which I couldn't even believe, because the whole way through that had not been the case. And then my teacher told me that they had given me a much lower grade, but an examiner from London had come to look at my work, and the examiner said, she writes like a master, so you have to give her a higher grade. Wow. And when I heard that, I was like, that's Gurudev. That's completely Srila Gurudev. Like it was impossible. It was impossible for me to get into university. It was impossible to get those grades. And somehow he made everything happen. And it was, to me, it was such a miracle, because it showed me that even though things are impossible, when Srila Gurudev gives you the instruction and you just try, he does everything. And he just wants to see us try. And years later, that instruction still lives with me. And I see how, as he said, it has been good for my bhajan. One thing I realized was when I was in university, I didn't know this would happen, but at a certain point, I realized that I was having to learn Mayavad philosophy, and I was having to not just learn it, but write essays on it and argue for it. And if I didn't do that, I wasn't going to get the degree, because they wanted me to have that perspective. And so I asked Srila Gurudev, or I asked my mother to ask Srila Gurudev, like, what do I do? This is really difficult, actually, because I have to study Mayavad philosophy and I have to prove it. And Srila Gurudev's response was, no problem, just read my books too. And that was very soothing, because before that I had this perspective of, like, we hear so often, like, we shouldn't touch it, we shouldn't read it, we shouldn't look at it. And somehow Gurudev's instruction had put me right in the middle of the thing that we're not supposed to be associating with. But it was after I finished my master's. During my master's, I had no time to read any of Srila Gurudev's books. Like, I was so busy. But the whole way through, I kept thinking, I want to read Jaiva Dharma, I want to read Jaiva Dharma. So as soon as I finished, that was the first book that I picked up, and I started to read it again. And I'd read it, not all of it, but some of it many years before. And then when I picked it up again after my master's finished, I was able to read it in a whole new way. And I realized that by having to study like the best of Western philosophy, the highest things that it can say, the best arguments it has, all of Mayavadi philosophy, everything. And then I picked up Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's book. I could see how incredibly superior everything he says is compared to all of that. Like it was, I was reading it and I was like, this is the best argument that I have read in years. And nothing can counter that. So over time, I realized that even though Srila Gurudev helped me or gave me instructions that seemed material, that seemed to be about my material life, and that maybe seemed a bit basic even, everything he did was to cultivate something deeper, like a deeper understanding, a deeper connection, and a deeper desire, because after university I had no desire to read anything anymore other than that. I mean, there's a lot I could say, but I'm just going to stop so you can.
Or you can take turns, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I think just okay. The last thing that I want to say relates to university, and then I will stop. Which is that when I was there, I made friends with many people who weren't devotees, who seemed to have a very good nature, be very inquisitive, intelligent, seemed to have natural devotee qualities to me, but they really didn't like religion. And any mention of religion, they were very against it. And I wrote to Srila Gurudev and I was like, what do I do about this? Like, I want to be able to help them. I'd love to speak to them about Krishna consciousness, but they have such an aversion to it. And Srila Gurudev wrote back to me saying, we are not saying that anyone needs to join an organized religion. We are not preaching religion. And he said, but if you want to understand something deeply, you go to a qualified teacher who can teach you about it. So if you want to understand the soul, you go to a teacher who can understand the soul. And he said, what we're doing is like PhD study about the soul. And he said, that he basically said that was the most important thing. All they needed to do was contact a teacher and follow the instructions of the teacher, but no one needed to join anything, because we're not preaching that. We're not trying to create religions. We're not trying to make everyone fit into one thing. We're just trying to help people discover more about the soul by having that relationship to Sri Guru. And that was, again, something really powerful for me. Where I realized that, at least from my perspective, that's really what Srila Gurudev was doing, was building such a strong relationship with all of us and giving us so much incredible Tattva and insights to, Goloka Vrindavan and all these things that we had even if we'd heard about it before, he added so much depth and so much nuance and mood and secrets and all of this. More than any of us can conceive of or hold, but he was putting it all out there so that people of all walks of life could connect to him and could connect to Mahaprabhu's movement and could connect to Radha and Krishna in any way that they can. So yeah, I'm gonna end.
Sure.
Yeah.
Didi, if you want to say more, you can go on. We can have Prabhuji on some other day, no problem.
No.
That's true.
Yeah, it's a very inspiring talk you're saying. Yes.
No, I think
Seriously, it's not a problem.
No. I don't really know how to end it other than just to say that I think, at least in my own life, Srila Gurudev's instructions sometimes, like I said, seemed very basic. Like whenever I asked him a question, he would just say, read my books. And any instruction he gave me would just be, how much are you chanting? Chant more. Or there was never anything that felt like, go out, do this, do that. It wasn't like this huge, like, you're on a mission. but everything that he said on a personal level and everything that he did, even when he was just making fun of me, or which he did a few times, or, you know, like these interactions build a kind of relationship that becomes indestructible.
Can you narrate those ones when he made fun of you?
Sorry?
The stories when he made fun of you.
Well, my sister, I think when I was younger, I used to have this idea that because I was older, I was better. Like I just, like
everybody has that. Everybody has that.
like I just thought, well, I'm the oldest, and my sister's name is Lali, and one day we were stood next to each other, and it was after, I don't know, 3-4 years after getting initiated. Maybe I was 11 or 12, and Srila Gurudev comes up to me, and at that point my sister started outgrowing me. She's taller than me now, but this is when she started getting taller and taller, and he points to me and he's like, Lali, and I'm like, no, I'm Sudevi, and he's like, no, Lali, and I'm like, I'm Sudevi. and he was like, no, she's big, you're small. And I remember when he first said that, I was like, no, I'm the oldest. Like, for a second I thought he couldn't remember who I was, or you know, and then I realized he was making fun of me. But from that moment on, every time he saw me for a few years, he would do that. He would remind me, she's big, you're small. She's big, you're small. And he would call me Lali. And what was interesting was from that moment on, everyone around me thought she was older. And to this day, everyone thinks she's older.
Oh.
People see us and they think I'm the younger one. And it never happened before. But I realized that Srila Gurudev was teaching me that even though I was older, she is a superior devotee. And she really is, like, she really, really is deeper and more qualified and just more advanced in bhakti than I am. But Gurudev had to tease me for a few years for that message to finally go in, because I'm quite stubborn. And then there was another time I was doing a play in Kartik and I was Krishna. And it was the pastime where Krishna throws rocks at, what's the name of that pastime again? All the gopis carrying the yoga pots. Yeah. It was that pastime. And at the end of that play, it was Kartik 2005, I think. At the end of that play, we all went up to Srila Gurudev and to like pay our obeisances, and some of the devotees playing gopis went first. And then when it was my turn to come, I saw Srila Gurudev looking at me, and he was looking at me in a way he'd never looked at me before, like smiling and laughing, but his eyes looked kind of like intense as well, like like I was in trouble. And I walked up, and because I was still dressed as Krishna and everything, and I walked up to Srila Gurudev, and everyone else got, you know, a pat on the head or a garland. And I walk up to Srila Gurudev and bow slightly, and all he does is just, he punched me in the face twice in front of everyone. And it looked like a really soft punch, but actually it felt really hard. And he was just laughing and I was laughing. And I remember thinking in that moment, it felt like he'd punched something out of me. Like it wasn't just a play punch, like he was actually, something was being blown out of me in that moment. Anyway, I would like to stop here because I'd like to hear what you have to say. So,
so nice, very nice. We'll talk about it later. I think let's first hear from Prabhuji. Yes, very nice, very heart touching.